Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates worried about prom dates and college applications, she spent her afternoons at the local shooting range with her grandfather, a Vietnam veteran who taught her that precision and patience were more valuable than pretty dresses. The summer before her senior year, everything changed. Her grandfather received a phone call that made his face go pale. Someone from his old unit was in trouble, serious trouble. Drug cartels had taken over a small border town, and innocent people were dying. The local authorities were either bought off or too scared to act. "Grandpa, we have to help," Sarah said, watching him pace around their kitchen. "This isn't a game, Sarah. These people are killers. They've murdered entire families." But Sarah had made up her mind. She spent the next month training harder than ever before. Her grandfather, seeing her determination, taught her everything he knew about survival, tactics, and combat. He gave her his old rifle, a weapon that had seen action in the jungles of Vietnam. The night before she left, her grandfather carved something into the wooden stock of the rifle. "Each mark represents a life saved," he explained. "Make sure you earn every one." Sarah drove south toward the Mexican border, her heart pounding with fear and excitement. She had no idea that within months that rifle would carry marks that would make hardened criminals step back in fear. She was just an 18-year-old girl with a strong sense of justice and deadly accurate aim. The border town of Esperanza was supposed to be her first stop, a place to gather information and plan her next move. Instead, it became the beginning of a legend that would spread through the criminal underworld like wildfire. As she parked her truck outside the town's only motel, Sarah noticed the streets were empty despite the early evening hour. Windows were boarded up, and the few people she saw walked quickly with their heads down. This place was living in fear. The motel clerk, an elderly Mexican man, looked terrified when she asked for a room. "Señorita, you should leave this place. It is not safe for young ladies." "I can take care of myself," Sarah replied, paying for 3 nights in advance. That first night, she heard gunshots in the distance and saw fires burning on the outskirts of town. From her motel window, she watched trucks filled with armed men patrolling the streets. These weren't police vehicles. They were cartel soldiers marking their territory. Sarah spent the next day observing, learning the patterns of the cartel's operations. She discovered they were running drugs through the town and using it as a base for human trafficking. The local police chief was on their payroll, and anyone who opposed them simply disappeared. By her second night in Esperanza, Sarah had identified her first target, a cartel lieutenant who was terrorizing local shop owners for protection money. She watched him from the shadows as he slapped an old woman who couldn't pay. That's when Sarah knew her grandfather was right. Sometimes good people had to do terrible things to protect the innocent. She followed the lieutenant to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Through her scope, she could see him counting money while his men loaded drugs into trucks. Sarah took a deep breath, remembered her grandfather's lessons about wind speed and distance, and squeezed the trigger. One shot, clean and precise. The lieutenant dropped instantly. As chaos erupted in the warehouse, Sarah slipped away into the darkness. Back in her motel room, she carved the first mark into her rifle's stock. One life taken to save many others. She tried to feel guilty about killing someone, but all she felt was a strange sense of purpose. The next morning, the whole town was buzzing with news of the lieutenant's death. Shop owners were speaking in whispers, hope creeping back into their voices. Someone was fighting back against the cartel, and that someone was very, very good with a rifle. Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The cartel would send more men, and they would be looking for whoever killed their lieutenant. But she was ready for them. Her grandfather had trained her well, and she had something the cartel didn't expect: the element of surprise and the determination of someone fighting for justice rather than money. As she cleaned her rifle that morning, Sarah thought about the path she was choosing. There would be no going back to her normal life after this. She was becoming something her old classmates would never understand, a hunter in a world full of predators. And she was very, very good at hunting. The cartel's response came faster than Sarah expected. 3 black SUVs rolled into Esperanza the next day, filled with heavily armed men wearing tactical gear. Their leader was a man called El Martillo, the Hammer, known throughout the region for his brutal interrogation methods. Sarah watched from the roof of an abandoned building as El Martillo's men went door to door, questioning locals about the lieutenant's death. Anyone who looked nervous or scared got dragged into the street for more intensive questioning. By noon, 2 shopkeepers had been beaten unconscious and an old man was missing 3 fingers. Someone in this pathetic town killed Diego. El Martillo announced through a bullhorn, "Give me the killer, or I start executing 1 person every hour until someone talks." Sarah's blood ran cold. These weren't just criminals, they were terrorists holding an entire town hostage. She counted 15 men total, all carrying automatic weapons. Even with her skills, taking on that many trained killers seemed impossible. That's when she remembered another lesson from her grandfather. Sometimes you can't win by fighting fair. You win by being smarter than your enemy. Instead of a direct assault, Sarah decided to pick them off one by one, using the town's layout to her advantage. Esperanza was built on a hill, with narrow alleyways and old buildings that provided perfect sniper positions. She spent the afternoon mapping out firing positions and escape routes. Her first opportunity came at sunset. 2 cartel soldiers were posted as lookouts on opposite ends of the main street. Sarah positioned herself in the bell tower of an abandoned church, giving her a clear view of both positions. The shot on the first lookout was easy. 200 yards, slight crosswind, no obstructions. The man dropped silently, his partner unable to see what happened from his position 3 blocks away. Moving quickly, Sarah relocated to the roof of the old bank building. The second lookout was nervously scanning the area where his partner had been, completely unaware of the new threat angle. Sarah's second shot dropped him before he could raise his radio. 2 down, 13 to go. El Martillo discovered his missing sentries within an hour. His rage was terrifying to witness. He began shooting at random buildings, screaming threats into the night. But Sarah was already gone, moving through the network of underground tunnels that connected the old buildings. The next morning brought more systematic hunting. El Martillo had learned his lesson about spreading his men too thin. Now they traveled in groups of 4, checking every building methodically. But this actually worked to Sarah's advantage. Larger groups made bigger targets and more noise. She caught the first search team in the old textile factory. Using an explosive device made from fertilizer and diesel fuel, another gift from her grandfather's wartime knowledge, Sarah brought down part of the building's 2nd floor. The collapse killed 2 men instantly and trapped the other 2 under debris. While El Martillo's remaining men rushed to help their trapped comrades, Sarah was already setting up for her next shot from the grain elevator across town. She picked off one of the rescuers before melting back into the shadows. By the 3rd day, El Martillo had lost 8 men and was beginning to panic. He'd called for reinforcements, but they wouldn't arrive for another 2 days. His remaining soldiers were jumpy and trigger-happy, shooting at shadows and arguing among themselves. Sarah decided it was time to get personal. She left a note pinned to the church door where El Martillo would find it. "Your men die because you prey on the innocent. Leave now or join them." El Martillo's response was to burn down 3 houses and execute the town's priest. Sarah watched from her hiding place, her jaw clenched with cold fury. This man had just signed his own death warrant. That night, she infiltrated the motel where El Martillo had set up his command post. Using skills her grandfather had taught her about moving silently, she got within 50 feet of his room before being spotted by a guard. The ensuing firefight was brief, but brutal. Sarah's rifle work was surgical. Each shot carefully placed to avoid hitting any of the motel's innocent occupants. When the smoke cleared, 3 more cartel soldiers were dead, and El Martillo was trapped in his room with only 2 bodyguards left. "Come out and face me," El Martillo screamed. "Stop hiding like a coward!" Sarah's response came in the form of a sniper bullet that shattered the window next to his head. The message was clear. She could have killed him any time she wanted, but she was choosing to let him sweat. As dawn approached, Sarah had carved 8 more marks into her rifle stock. 9 total kills, and the most dangerous cartel leader in the region was cowering in a motel room, afraid to show his face. Word of the mysterious sniper was already spreading beyond Esperanza, carried by terrified cartel messengers who had witnessed the systematic destruction of El Martillo's unit. Sarah Martinez was no longer just a girl with a rifle. She was becoming something the criminal underworld would learn to fear. A ghost who struck without warning and left only death in her wake. El Martillo made his final mistake when he decided to use the town's children as human shields. Sarah watched in horror from her position as cartel soldiers dragged 12 kids from their homes and lined them up in the town square. The children, ranging from 6 to 14 years old, stood trembling in the morning sun while El Martillo shouted his ultimatum. "Ghost sniper, you want these kids to live? Come out now or I start shooting them one by one." Sarah's hands shook as she adjusted her scope. This was exactly the kind of situation her grandfather had warned her about, when doing the right thing seemed impossible because every choice led to innocent people getting hurt. But then she noticed something. El Martillo had positioned his remaining men poorly. In his desperation and rage, he'd forgotten basic tactical principles. His 2 bodyguards were standing too close together, and there was a clear sight line from the water tower to his position. Sarah had one chance to end this without any children dying. She would need to make 3 impossible shots in less than 10 seconds, and each one had to be perfect. Miss even once and innocent kids would pay the price. She took a deep breath, remembering her grandfather's voice. "When everything is on the line, trust your training. Don't think, just shoot." The first shot took down both bodyguards simultaneously. The bullet passed through the first man's head and into the second man's chest. Before El Martillo could even process what had happened, Sarah's second shot shattered his gun hand, sending his weapon spinning away across the cobblestones. Her third shot was the most important. Instead of killing El Martillo, she put a bullet through his kneecap, dropping him to the ground in agony. She wanted him alive for what came next. The children scattered immediately, running to their parents who had been watching in terror from doorways and windows. Within minutes, the town square was filled with angry residents who had lived in fear for too long. Sarah watched from the water tower as the people of Esperanza surrounded El Martillo. She didn't interfere as they dragged him away. Some forms of justice were too personal for outsiders to handle. By the time reinforcements arrived 2 days later, they found an empty town square and no trace of their leader. The only evidence of what had happened was a message spray-painted on the wall of the motel. "The ghost is watching. Tell your bosses." Word spread quickly through the cartel networks. A lone sniper had single-handedly destroyed one of their most feared units. El Martillo's reinforcements took one look at the empty town and the terrified survivors from other cartel cells, then packed up and left without firing a shot. But Sarah's work was just beginning. Esperanza had been liberated, but there were dozens of other towns living under cartel control. As she drove north toward her next target, she carved 3 more marks into her rifle stock. 12 total kills, and each one had been earned protecting innocent people. The next town was called Pueblo Perdido, Lost Town. Unlike Esperanza, this place wasn't just occupied by cartels. It had become their primary training facility. New recruits came here to learn how to be killers, and experienced soldiers came to rest between operations. Sarah spent a week observing from the hills surrounding the town. She counted at least 40 cartel members, plus civilian instructors who taught combat techniques, weapons handling, and torture methods. The whole operation was run by a woman known as La Víbora, the Viper, who was said to be even more ruthless than El Martillo. The challenge here wasn't just the numbers. These weren't street thugs or local muscle. These were professional killers with military training, proper equipment, and defensive positions. Taking them on would require patience, planning, and a lot of luck. Sarah's opportunity came during a training exercise. La Víbora had organized a mock assault on a replica village, complete with civilian mannequins. Watching the cartel soldiers practice their killing techniques on fake families made Sarah's blood boil with rage. She waited until the exercise was in full swing, then began her own lesson in precision shooting. From a ridge 800 yards away, Sarah started picking off instructors and senior cartel members. Her first shot dropped the weapons instructor, while he was demonstrating grenade throwing techniques. The second shot killed the torture specialist who had been explaining different methods of extracting information from captives. The third shot eliminated La Víbora's second-in-command as he tried to rally the confused soldiers. What followed was 40 minutes of absolute chaos. The cartel soldiers had no idea where the shots were coming from. They fired wildly in all directions, hitting their own men more often than empty air. Some tried to flee in vehicles, only to have their tires shot out by Sarah's methodical marksmanship. By the time the dust settled, Sarah had added 18 more marks to her rifle. The cartel's training facility was destroyed, their equipment abandoned, and their surviving members scattered to the 4 winds. But the most important kill had been La Víbora herself. Sarah had saved her for last, waiting until the female cartel leader tried to escape in an armored vehicle. One shot through the driver's side window had ended the career of one of the most feared criminals in Mexico. As Sarah drove away from Pueblo Perdido, she realized something had changed inside her. The nervous 18-year-old who had left Texas months ago was gone. In her place was someone harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. She no longer hesitated before pulling the trigger or felt sick after making a kill. Her grandfather had warned her this would happen. "The job changes you," he'd said. "Just make sure you remember why you're doing it." Looking at the 30 marks now carved into her rifle stock, Sarah wondered if she could ever go back to her old life. But then she thought about the children in Esperanza's town square and knew she had found her true calling. The cartels had made too many people suffer, and someone had to make them pay. The legend of La Fantasma, the ghost, had spread far beyond the Mexican border. Cartel leaders were offering massive bounties for information about the mysterious sniper who had single-handedly destroyed 3 of their operations. But it wasn't just criminals who had taken notice. Someone else was watching Sarah's work with great interest. Agent Marcus Rivera of the DEA had been tracking cartel activities along the border for 15 years. When reports started coming in about a vigilante sniper, his first instinct was concern. Vigilantes were unpredictable and often made law enforcement's job harder. But as he studied the pattern of attacks, Rivera realized this wasn't some trigger-happy cowboy with a gun. Every target had been carefully chosen. Every operation had been precisely executed. Most importantly, no innocent civilians had been harmed despite the chaos surrounding each attack. This ghost sniper wasn't just skilled. They had a moral code that even impressed hardened federal agents. Rivera's investigation led him to Esperanza, where he interviewed survivors of El Martillo's occupation. The stories he heard painted a picture of someone who fought only to protect the innocent. Local residents spoke of their mysterious savior with something approaching religious reverence. "She saved our children," an elderly shopkeeper told him. The devil himself couldn't have stopped her when she saw those babies in danger. Rivera's blood went cold. "She? You saw the sniper?" "Only once, from very far away. But yes, it was a young woman. Very small, but she moved like a shadow. This changed everything." Rivera had been hunting a male professional, possibly ex-military. Instead, he was dealing with a female amateur who had somehow achieved what entire DEA task forces couldn't accomplish. The implications were staggering. Meanwhile, Sarah had moved north to a city called Sangre, Nueva, New Blood. This wasn't a small border town under cartel occupation. This was a major drug distribution hub with over 100,000 residents, where the cartels operated like a shadow government, alongside corrupt officials. The target here was different too. Instead of military-style operations, Sarah was facing an urban warfare scenario. The cartels controlled entire neighborhoods through a network of informants, street dealers, and enforcers. Taking them down would require a completely different approach. Sarah rented a small apartment in the city's industrial district and spent weeks studying her enemies. The cartel presence was massive. Over 200 active members organized into specialized cells. There were smugglers, assassins, money launderers, and corrupt police officers all working together in a complex criminal organization. At the center of it all was a man called El Rey, the King. He wasn't just a cartel leader. He was a businessman who had legitimized his drug empire through real estate investments, construction companies, and political connections. Killing him wouldn't be as simple as a long-range sniper shot. He was protected by layers of security and rarely appeared in public. Sarah's first targets were the street-level enforcers who terrorized local businesses and residents. Working at night, she began systematically eliminating the cartel's most violent members. A drug dealer who forced children to carry his product. An enforcer who beat up shopkeepers who wouldn't pay protection money. A torturer who worked in the cartel's underground interrogation center. Each kill was planned and executed with surgical precision. Sarah would observe her targets for days, learning their routines and identifying moments of vulnerability. Then she would strike once and disappear back into the urban landscape. The body count rose steadily, 35 marks, 40 marks, 50 marks. The cartel leadership began to panic as their enforcers died one by one. They couldn't understand how someone was getting so close to their people without being detected by their extensive surveillance network. El Rey's response was swift and brutal. He imposed martial law on his territory, with armed patrols on every corner and a strict curfew for all residents. Anyone caught outside after dark would be shot on sight. He also imported professional killers from other cartels, men who specialized in hunting down troublesome individuals. But Sarah had advantages her enemies couldn't match. She was small enough to move through spaces that larger men couldn't access. She had no known associates or patterns that could be predicted. Most importantly, she had the support of the local population, who provided her with information and safe houses. The tide turned when Sarah discovered the location of El Rey's money laundering operation, a legitimate-looking accounting firm that processed millions in drug profits. Instead of killing the accountants, Sarah decided to hit them where it would hurt most: their profits. Using thermite devices made from readily available materials, Sarah destroyed the building's server room and paper files. Decades of financial records went up in flames, along with detailed information about cartel investments and corrupt officials. The economic damage was far more devastating than any number of dead enforcers. El Rey's empire began to crumble as his partners lost confidence, and his political protectors distanced themselves from the chaos. Other cartel leaders saw opportunity in his weakness and began moving against his territory. That's when Agent Rivera finally caught up with Sarah. He had been tracking her movements through careful analysis of security camera footage and witness reports. One night, as she returned to her apartment after destroying a drug warehouse, Rivera was waiting for her. "Sarah Martinez," he said, stepping out of the shadows. "We need to talk." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her concealed pistol, but Rivera held up his hands peacefully. "I'm not here to arrest you," he continued. "I'm here to offer you a job." For the first time in months, Sarah was speechless. A federal agent was standing in her hideout, knowing her real name, and instead of handcuffs, he was offering employment. "The DEA needs someone with your particular skills," Rivera explained. "Someone who can go places we can't, do things we can't officially do. The cartels have killed thousands of innocent people, and they're getting stronger every day. We need all the help we can get." Sarah looked at her rifle, now bearing 63 carefully carved marks. Each one represented a life taken in defense of innocent people. The question was whether she was ready to make this fight official, with government backing and resources, or whether she preferred the freedom of being a ghost that answered to no one but her own conscience. Rivera waited patiently as she weighed her options, knowing that whatever she decided would change the course of the war against the cartels forever. Sarah stared at Agent Rivera for a long moment, her mind racing through the implications of his offer. Working with the DEA would mean resources, intelligence, and backup support, but it would also mean rules, oversight, and accountability to people who had never pulled a trigger to save innocent lives. "What exactly are you offering?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Rivera pulled out a thick folder and set it on her small kitchen table. "Off-the-books operations against high-value cartel targets. You'd have access to intelligence networks, advanced equipment, and legal protection for your actions. In exchange, you'd work exclusively for us and follow our targeting priorities." Sarah flipped through the folder, seeing photographs and profiles of cartel leaders throughout Mexico and Central America. These weren't small-time thugs like the ones she'd been hunting. These were the heads of criminal empires responsible for thousands of deaths, massive drug trafficking operations, and systematic corruption of entire governments. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Rivera's expression remained neutral. "Then you continue doing what you're doing until you make a mistake and get killed. Or until you kill the wrong person and we're forced to hunt you down. This isn't sustainable, Sarah. The cartels are mobilizing against you. They've brought in professional assassins from Colombia, ex-military contractors from Africa, even former Russian Spetsnaz operators. You're good, but you're still just one person." As if to prove his point, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from one of her local informants. "Armed men asking questions about young woman with rifle. They have your picture. Get out now." Sarah grabbed her gear bag and rifle case without hesitation. "We continue this conversation somewhere else," she told Rivera. "My safe house is compromised." They left through the building's back entrance, moving quickly through the narrow alleys Sarah had memorized during her weeks in the city. Behind them, she could hear vehicles converging on her former hideout. Rivera had been right about one thing. The cartels were definitely mobilizing. "There's a DEA safe house 20 minutes north of here," Rivera said as they reached his unmarked vehicle. "We can talk there." "No," Sarah replied, scanning the street for threats. "Too predictable. Follow me." She led him to an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city, a place she had scouted as an emergency fallback position. Only after checking the perimeter and setting up defensive positions did she agree to continue their conversation. "Why me?" Sarah asked directly. "The government has plenty of trained assassins. Why recruit a 19-year-old girl with no formal military training?" Rivera smiled grimly. "Because trained assassins follow orders without question, and sometimes those orders are wrong. Because you've proven you can operate independently in hostile territory without support. And because you have something our people lost a long time ago. You actually give a damn about innocent victims." He opened another file, showing photographs of mass graves, burned villages, and families torn apart by cartel violence. "These people died while we were following proper procedures and working through diplomatic channels. You've saved more lives in 6 months than my task force has saved in 6 years. Sarah studied the images, seeing faces that reminded her of the children in Esperanza's town square. "What would be my first assignment?" Eduardo Vasconcelos, also known as El Carnicero, the Butcher. He runs the largest human trafficking operation from Mexico to the United States. His organization has kidnapped over 3,000 people in the past 5 years, including 800 children. He's completely insulated from law enforcement through bribes and political connections. Rivera showed her satellite photos of a massive compound in the mountains of Guerrero State. He's hosting a gathering of cartel leaders next week to discuss expanding their trafficking routes. 12 of the most wanted criminals in the Western Hemisphere will be in one location. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. It was an unprecedented opportunity to strike a devastating blow against the cartels, but it was also obviously a trap. "Too convenient, too perfect. What aren't you telling me?" she asked. Rivera hesitated, then pulled out one final photograph. It showed a familiar face. A young man in military fatigue standing beside an American flag. "My son, Lieutenant James Rivera, was killed 3 months ago during a raid on one of Vasconcelos' trafficking centers. 20 children were murdered in retaliation for that raid." Sarah understood now. This wasn't just about official DEA business. This was personal revenge disguised as a government operation. Rivera was using her as a weapon against the man who killed his son. "The official mission is intelligence gathering," Rivera continued. "Unofficially, I want Vasconcelos dead, along with every other cartel leader at that meeting. Can you do it?" Sarah looked at her rifle case, thinking about the 63 marks carved into the wooden stock. Each one represented a choice to take a life in defense of innocent people. Now she was being asked to make that choice on a much larger scale. "If I do this, there's no going back," she said. "The cartels will never stop hunting me. My old life will be completely over." "Your old life was over the moment you pulled that first trigger in Esperanza," Rivera replied. "The only question now is whether you want to die as a lone vigilante or as someone who struck a real blow against these monsters." Sarah made her decision. "I'll need complete operational freedom. No oversight, no rules of engagement, no questions asked about my methods. Done. And I want a promise. When this is over, if I'm still alive, I walk away clean. New identity, relocation assistance, the whole package." Rivera nodded. "The DEA takes care of its assets." As they shook hands, Sarah wondered if she was making a deal with angels or devils. But looking at the photos of Vasconcelos' victims, children who would never see their families again, she knew she didn't have a choice. The war against the cartels was about to escalate dramatically, and Sarah Martinez was about to become the most dangerous weapon in the government's arsenal. Whether she would survive the experience was another question entirely. 3 days later, Sarah was on a plane to Mexico City, carrying forged identification papers and enough weapons to outfit a small army. The DEA's resources were impressive, but she knew that once she entered Vasconcelos' mountain stronghold, she would be completely on her own. The scared girl from Texas was gone forever. In her place was someone the cartel leaders would learn to fear more than death itself. A ghost with a rifle and absolutely nothing left to lose. The mountain compound of Eduardo Vasconcelos was a fortress carved into the Sierra Madre range, accessible only by a single winding road that could be easily defended. Sarah spent 2 days studying the layout from surrounding peaks, using military-grade spotting scopes provided by the DEA to map guard positions, patrol routes, and defensive installations. What she saw made her stomach turn. The compound wasn't just a criminal headquarters, it was a human trafficking processing center. Through her scope, she watched as trucks arrived carrying terrified civilians who were sorted into different buildings like livestock. Children were separated from adults, families torn apart with casual brutality. Sarah counted at least 200 guards, including what appeared to be former military personnel, manning heavy weapons positions. The cartel leaders attending the summit had brought their own security details, turning the compound into an armed camp with nearly 400 hostile personnel. A direct assault would be suicide. Even with her skills, the numbers were overwhelming. But Sarah had learned that sometimes the best way to attack a fortress was from the inside. Using intelligence provided by Rivera, Sarah identified a weak point in the compound's security: a supply convoy that made regular trips to the nearby village for food and equipment. The convoy used local drivers who were too frightened to refuse cartel demands, but who secretly hated their criminal employers. Sarah approached the lead driver, an older man named Pablo whose grandson had been kidnapped by Vasconcelos's men the previous year. She offered him a choice: help her infiltrate the compound and rescue his grandson, or watch more children disappear forever. Pablo's hands shook as he agreed to hide Sarah in a secret compartment built into his supply truck. "If they find you, they will kill us both very slowly," he whispered. "If they don't find me, your grandson comes home tonight," Sarah replied. The truck convoy rolled through the compound's main gate just as the sun was setting. Sarah remained hidden in her cramped compartment, breathing carefully through a concealed air tube as guards searched the vehicles. Her heart hammered against her ribs as footsteps walked directly over her hiding spot, but the false bottom held. Once inside the compound, Sarah waited until the trucks were parked in the motor pool before emerging. The place was bustling with activity as servants prepared for the evening's feast. Cartel leaders from across Mexico and Central America had arrived to discuss expanding their trafficking networks into new territories. Sarah had brought a different kind of weapon for this mission, not her rifle, but military-grade explosives provided by the DEA. Her plan was simple but devastating: plant charges throughout the compound's main buildings, then detonate them during the summit meeting when all the cartel leaders would be gathered in one place. Moving through the compound's shadows, Sarah began her deadly work. She placed charges in the main conference building where the meeting would take place, the communications center that coordinated trafficking operations, and the armory where weapons were stored. Each explosive was carefully positioned for maximum structural damage. But as she placed the final charge in the building where kidnapped civilians were held, Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze. Children crying in the basement below. Dozens of them, locked in cages like animals waiting to be sold to the highest bidders. Sarah's carefully planned mission suddenly became personal. She couldn't simply blow up the compound and walk away knowing innocent children would die in the explosions. She had to get them out first, which meant her stealth mission was about to become a full-scale rescue operation. Using bolt cutters from the motor pool, Sarah broke into the basement prison. What she found there would haunt her nightmares forever. 53 children ranging from toddlers to teenagers, all showing signs of abuse and malnutrition. They cowered from her at first, thinking she was another cartel guard coming to hurt them. "I'm here to help," Sarah whispered in Spanish, cutting through the first cage lock. "We're going to get you home to your families." Getting 53 children out of a heavily guarded compound without alerting hundreds of armed men seemed impossible. But Sarah had learned that impossible situations sometimes required desperate measures. She led the children through service tunnels that connected the prison building to the compound's outer wall. It was slow, terrifying work, keeping dozens of traumatized kids quiet while navigating through narrow passages in complete darkness. Every few minutes, Sarah had to stop and comfort a crying child, or help someone who had frozen with fear. They were halfway to the outer wall when the first explosion rocked the compound. One of Sarah's charges had detonated prematurely, possibly triggered by electrical interference. Alarms began blaring and she could hear guards shouting as they mobilized to find the intruder. Sarah had to make an impossible choice. She could abandon the children and escape with her mission partially complete, or she could stay and try to get them to safety, knowing it would probably mean her death. Looking at the terrified faces around her, Sarah knew there was only one choice she could live with. "Stay close to me," she told the children. "Whatever happens, don't let go of each other." The compound erupted into chaos as more explosives detonated throughout the facility. The communications center collapsed in flames, cutting off contact with outside cartel reinforcements. The armory explosion sent ammunition cooking off in every direction, forcing guards to take cover. Using the confusion to her advantage, Sarah led the children through a gap she blew in the outer wall. Pablo was waiting outside with his truck and several vehicles borrowed from village residents. The man had proven braver than anyone expected, risking everything to help rescue the kidnapped children. As the convoy of rescued children disappeared into the mountain darkness, Sarah remained behind to finish her original mission. The cartel summit was still in progress, with leaders trapped in the conference building by the surrounding explosions and fires. Sarah climbed to a nearby ridge and opened her rifle case. Through her scope, she could see 12 of the most wanted criminals in the Western Hemisphere huddled inside the conference building, cut off from their security details by the fires raging throughout the compound. Her grandfather's old rifle felt steady in her hands as she lined up her shots. These weren't random killings or acts of vengeance. These were executions of mass murderers who had destroyed countless families and corrupted entire nations. One by one, Sarah carved 12 final marks into her rifle stock. Eduardo Vasconcelos, the butcher, died with a single shot through his black heart. The other cartel leaders followed quickly, their criminal empires left leaderless in a matter of minutes. As Sarah packed up her rifle and prepared to leave, she looked back at the burning compound. 75 marks now decorated her weapons stock, each one representing a choice to fight evil regardless of the personal cost. Agent Rivera would be pleased with the mission's success, but Sarah knew her war was far from over. The rescued children would need protection and medical care. Other cartels would move to fill the power vacuum left by tonight's killings. And somewhere in the darkness, new enemies were already planning their revenge. But for now, 53 children were safe, 12 monsters were dead, and the world was a slightly better place. For someone who had started as a frightened teenager with a hunting rifle, that felt like victory enough. 6 months after the mountain compound raid, Sarah Martinez found herself in an unlikely place, a small coffee shop in Guatemala City, sitting across from a man who represented everything she had been fighting against. But Diego Morales wasn't there to surrender or negotiate. He was there because he had a proposition that would change everything. "You killed my brother," Morales said calmly, stirring sugar into his espresso. Eduardo was many things, but he was family. Sarah kept her hands visible on the table, knowing that at least 6 armed men were watching from various positions around the cafe. Her concealed pistol felt heavy against her ribs, but she made no move toward it. "Your brother kidnapped children," Sarah replied. "He deserved what he got." Morales nodded slowly. "Perhaps, but his death created problems for both of us. The power vacuum you created has sparked a war between the remaining cartels. Thousands of innocent people have died in the fighting. Is that what you wanted?" Sarah had spent sleepless nights wondering the same thing. The destruction of Vasconcelos' organization had indeed triggered a massive conflict, as surviving cartels fought for control of trafficking routes and territory. The violence had spread across 3 countries, claiming civilian casualties on a scale that made Sarah question whether her actions had actually made things worse. "What do you want?" she asked. Morales slid a photograph across the table. It showed a massive cargo ship docked at a port, surrounded by armed guards and heavy security. That vessel contains 800 kidnapped people being transported to buyers in Southeast Asia. Children, teenagers, young adults, all destined for lives of slavery and abuse. It leaves port in 48 hours. Sarah studied the image, recognizing the professional layout of the security positions. "This isn't your operation." "No, it belongs to Viktor Kozlov, a Russian who moved into Mexico after your mountain raid. He's trying to rebuild what my brother destroyed. But with more violence and less discretion, he's already murdered 3 villages that refuse to cooperate with his recruitment methods." "And you want me to stop him?" Morales leaned back in his chair. "I want you to eliminate him. In exchange, I offer you something no government agency can provide. a way to end this war permanently. He slid another document across the table. It was a detailed organizational chart showing the command structure of every major cartel operating in Central and South America. Names, locations, relationships, weaknesses, everything Sarah would need to systematically dismantle the entire criminal network. "Why would you give me this?" Sarah asked suspiciously. "Because I'm tired," Morales said simply. "Tired of the violence, tired of the fear, tired of watching children die for profit. My organization was always different from the others. We focused on drugs and smuggling, but never human trafficking. Never children. But now with monsters like Kozlov taking over, there's no place left for professionals with standards." Sarah realized what he was really offering. Morales wasn't just giving her intelligence. He was offering to help her destroy his own world in exchange for a chance at something approaching redemption. "If I do this, if I take down Kozlov and use your information to eliminate the other cartels, what happens to you?" "I disappear. New identity, new life, far away from all this. But first I help you finish what you started. Clean slate for everyone. The good, the bad, and the complicated." Sarah looked at the photograph of the cargo ship again, thinking about 800 innocent people facing lives of unspeakable horror. Then she thought about the organizational chart and what it represented. The opportunity to end the cartel threat once and for all. "The ship first," she said. "Then we'll see about your grand plan." The port operation was Sarah's most complex mission yet. Instead of rural compounds or small-town hideouts, she was facing a major international facility with professional security, sophisticated surveillance systems, and backup from corrupt local authorities. But she also had advantages she'd never possessed before. Morales provided detailed intelligence about guard rotations, security protocols, and the ship's layout. More importantly, he arranged for a distraction that would draw attention away from Sarah's infiltration route. At exactly midnight, explosions erupted in the port's fuel storage area, a terrorist attack that sent emergency responders rushing to contain what appeared to be a major industrial accident. While authorities focused on the fires and potential environmental disaster, Sarah slipped aboard the cargo ship through a maintenance hatch. What she found in the ship's hold broke something inside her that had somehow survived 75 previous killings. The kidnapped people were packed into shipping containers like cargo, with minimal food, water, or sanitation. Many were already dead from the horrific conditions, while others were barely clinging to life. Sarah worked quickly to free as many survivors as possible, leading them to lifeboats while the ship's crew and security dealt with the chaos at the port. She managed to evacuate over 400 people before Kozlov's men realized what was happening. The ensuing firefight was unlike anything in Sarah's previous experience. Instead of long-range sniper work, she found herself in close-quarters combat aboard a ship filled with innocent civilians. Every shot had to be precisely placed to avoid hitting the people she was trying to save. When the smoke cleared, Sarah had added 52 more marks to her rifle stock. Viktor Kozlov died with a bullet between his eyes, his trafficking operation destroyed and his cargo liberated. But the victory felt hollow as Sarah watched medics treating survivors who had been broken by their ordeal. Standing on the dock as rescue workers loaded survivors into ambulances, Sarah realized that individual victories weren't enough anymore. As long as the larger criminal network existed, there would always be another Vasconcelos, another Kozlov, another ship full of human suffering. That's when she made her final decision about Morales' proposition. Using his organizational intelligence, Sarah embarked on a systematic campaign that lasted another 18 months. One by one, she eliminated every major cartel leader, destroyed every trafficking network, and dismantled the entire criminal infrastructure that had terrorized Central America for decades. The final mark carved into her rifle stock was number 127, the last of the cartel bosses who had built their empires on innocent blood. With that final shot, Sarah had accomplished something no government or military force had ever achieved: the complete destruction of the regional narcotics and human trafficking networks. But victory came at a price that Sarah was only beginning to understand. She had become something that existed outside normal society, a weapon too dangerous for civilian life, but too valuable for any government to simply retire. Agent Rivera had been true to his word about providing a new identity and relocation assistance. But Sarah knew there would always be another crisis, another enemy, Another impossible mission. Sitting in a small house in rural Montana, looking at her grandfather's rifle with its 127 carefully carved marks, Sarah wondered if she had won the war or simply become its final casualty. The scared teenager who had left Texas to help her grandfather's friend was gone forever, replaced by someone the world would remember as either a hero or a monster, depending on who was telling the story. The only thing Sarah knew for certain was that 127 evil people were no longer able to hurt innocent victims, and sometimes that had to be enough. Even if it cost her everything she used to be.